Perfect. Recording in progress. So, good evening and welcome again to yet another session, a nerdy Zoom session. I quite like these, I find them really good fun. So, tonight's session is classical conditioning, what it is, and how to do it. So, again, I've seen some faces here that I know and love already, and some new faces, which is very exciting. Welcome. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rach. You're going to get this standard introduction every week. I am the founder of Focus Dog Training and Bob and Pal's Dog Walking. I am a certified dog trainer through the Dog Training College, through Absolute Dogs. I'm a pro dog trainer. I've done all sorts of courses, IMDT courses, and yada, yada, yada. Most of my time now is spent supporting my team. And I'm also an assessor for the Paws Therapy Dog teams, where I assess their dog trainers' knowledge. So that's how I roll at the minute. I would describe myself very cleanly as a force-free, science-based trainer, and that's what I hope to bring to the table for you guys today. A lot of science and a lot of knowledge around being an awesome, awesome dog trainer for your own dog. Today we are delving into the world of classical conditioning, how dogs learn, essentially. We're getting into the nitty-gritty of it now, which is quite cool. So I'm going to be quite informative. I'm going to do a lot of talking at you, same as last week. And then at the end, I'm going to open up the floor for some questions and answers. So if you have anything that you think of as we're going through the sessions, please do shout up at the end and we'll talk it through. It's quite a fun one, is this? So I'm really looking forward to seeing what kinds of questions you guys come at me with at the end, because no doubt somewhere along in there, you'll go, oh, so that's why. And you'll figure something out as we're going through. So I'm quite excited to hear about those questions. So let's get started. What is classical conditioning? Let's look at it. Let's understand it to start with. So it's essentially training. It's essentially learning through association. Okay. Something that previously meant nothing now means something. Okay. Simple as that. So in dog training, classical conditioning is often used to create positive associations between a stimulus, and a stimulus is simply just a thing that happened, and an association, so a response, a behavior perhaps, or maybe even a feeling, and we can look at that in a little bit of depth in a few minutes as well. So really clean example, the easiest one I can think of, dog training that we all know, is the sound of a clicker. A clicker, before the dog has ever heard it in its life, means nothing. You can click your clicker, nothing happens because the dog doesn't think anything happens. The dog doesn't have any association with it. But after we've been training with it for a little bit, our dogs soon switch on that clicker means a treat is coming at us. A clicker equals a treat. A clicker equals a treat. And the dog's like, boom, you've got the clicker out. Happy days, let's go training. I know what that means, right? So I'm going to talk to you about two science experiments that have been absolutely pivotal in how we understand this part of training.
We can do that.
Claire, I'm sorry, my love, you've got your microphone on. Would you be able to just mute it for me? Thank you very much. Sorry, I know it's incredibly rude. Thanks for coming, but shut up. Okay, so two sessions, two science experiments I'd like to tell you about that are absolutely pivotal in this. First one, Pavlov's dogs. Okay, so Pavlov was studying, we've mostly heard of Pavlov's dogs. He was actually studying enzymes in saliva. And that's a bit I think people quite miss out of all of this sort of discussion around Pavlov's dogs. He was studying enzymes in saliva. And the way he did that was he hooked these poor dogs up, and it's not very nice. We wouldn't do it in today's day and age. But he hooked up their salivary glands to a load of collecting like teats on the side of their faces. And he knew that if he wanted to collect the saliva samples, what he needed to do was get them to dribble, right? He needed them to slobber. And the easiest way to get a dog to slobber is to present some food to it. And actually, just presenting the food and letting them smell it would be enough to start that saliva coming and start those enzymes being produced, right?
I've got the opposite problem.
Sorry, Claire, you're still on noise. Would you be able to just mute yourself again for me? Thank you. Sorry, it's a bit fussy, isn't it? Okay, so what he did was he hooked these dogs up, got these collecting ports on, and then he presented food to the dogs. And when they could smell it, they started dribbling. He collected it and took it off for sampling, right? What he actually noticed was when the researchers were preparing the food, they were preparing the food in a separate part of the lab, right? And as the food was hitting the bowls, the metal bowls, the dogs all the way on the other side of the lab started slobbering. And he's like, hold on a minute, what is going on here, right? And he figured out that what they'd done was they knew the sound of the food hitting the metal bowl, and that was enough to get them slobbering, which is mental, really, because that noise by itself shouldn't. So off he went sciencing, and he did himself some experiments. And this is where it got really cool. What he did was he took a bell, literally ding the bell, a bell, right? That means nothing to a dog. It's what we would call a neutral stimulus. And I'm going to start holding these little things up. This is just extra geek. You don't need to remember all of this in your day-to-day life, but this is for those of you who like to go super geek, right? So a bell is what we call a neutral stimulus. It means nothing to a dog. You can ding a bell all you like and no will happen because it means nothing, right? And what he did was he dinged his bell, his neutral stimulus, seconds before producing his food. Food is what we call an unconditioned stimulus. We've done nothing to it, yet it produces a response. We've done nothing. It's unconditional. It's going to happen whether or not we do something about it. It's an unconditioned stimulus. Presenting the food makes the dog slobber. The dog slobbering is what we call an unconditioned response. We've not done anything. Again, it was already there and it's always going to happen. So unconditioned stimulus produce an unconditioned response. Food makes dogs slobber, okay? And what he did was he dinged his bell and presented the food. He dinged his bell, presented the food. He dinged his bell, presented the food, so on and so forth. Loads of times, absolutely bonkers loads of times. And what then happened was he could ding his bell and what you got was a response. They started slobbering when they heard the bell. That means the bell's no longer a neutral stimulus. It now means something, right? And what it becomes is a conditioned stimulus. We've done something about it. We've made it do something. The conditioned stimulus produces a conditioned response, which is the dog now dribbles when it says, when it hears that bell, right? How very exciting. So that was the beginnings. We now know that if we take something that originally means nothing to a dog and pair it with something that does mean something to a dog, that original nothing will then mean something to the dog if we do it cleverly enough. Pretty cool stuff. There's also another experiment, less fun this one, little Albert. So little Albert, you're not going to like this one, I'm not going to lie. He was a little boy and his mum took him for an experiment. Presumably she needed some cash. It was back in the day, back in the day when you could do stuff to kids and get away with it. She took him to a science experiment. And what these guys did was they presented little Albert, this little boy, probably about Charlotte's age, somewhere between, I think he was about 9 months old. He was little. And they showed him lots of different things. They showed him balls and bells and whistles and toys and all sorts. He showed loads of different things. And they gauged his reaction to each of these things just before they did anything. They just went, what do you think to this, lad? And it turned out that little Albert really liked a little white fluffy rat. He really liked it. That like belly laugh giggling that little babies do, that funny, like, it's brilliant. This is absolutely fabulous. He loved this little white little white rat. They produced it and he cackled. Belly giggles, little kid, funny, funny, funny. Right. So we know little Albert likes the rat. The experimenters then weren't very nice. What they did was they produced the rat, and as they produced the rat, some horrible bloke in the corner of the room crashed some cymbals together real loud and startled little Albert, right? It made him jump. It made him scared, right? And poor lad, you can imagine what happened, started crying, not very nice, clinging on to his mum, horrible, horrible, right? And then they did it again and again and again. So what they were doing here was they were creating a situation where this original mouse that meant originally, I like it, I'm laughing, they paired it with something horrible that made him sad and made him scared. And they did that over and over and over till eventually they produced the rat. And guess what? Little Albert started crying. Didn't like the rat anymore. Not very nice. They've managed to change the association with that rat. It's no longer fun. It's sad. Not very nice. Did say we weren't going to like that one, didn't I? Sorry. Now, what they did do was they tried to reverse that, which is quite interesting. So then what they did was they switched it back around and they produced the rat, but tried to make it nice. Now, I'll be honest with you, I've had a complete blank. I can't remember exactly what they did to try and make it right again, but I do know they tried and they were sort of successful. So what they found was it's pretty easy to take something neutral or something nice and turn it into something scary. But it's not so easy to turn the scary thing back into a nice thing. And we see this a lot, actually, don't we? If anybody's got a reactive dog, something that we term a reactive dog, like they see a dog and they maybe bark and lunge and look scary, it's quite hard to flip that in the dog's head, quite hard to change that association over. But that's what we're doing. Essentially, what we're trying to do is change the association. Instead of you being scared by this thing, we're trying to change it so you're not so scared by this thing. Quite a long process, but there we go. So, 2 science experiments that gives us quite a lot of knowledge and quite a lot of depth and insight into how dogs are learning. How does it work in the real world then? So, got some lovely examples for you. We've already looked at the clicker, haven't we? We've already said the clicker initially was this neutral stimulus, wasn't it? It meant nothing to the dog, this neutral stimulus, this clicker. When we gave it food, we did clicker, food. The food, remember, is an unconditioned stimulus that already gets the response, doesn't it? And that response is, yeah, mummy, I like that. That's what we're going for, really, with the clicker, isn't it? We're not going for dribbling. We're not doing any science experiments like Pavlov. What we're going for is, yeah, mummy, I like that. That's what we're doing. So, neutral stimulus, the clicker, followed by the food, our unconditioned stimulus. Over time, what that means is the clicker equals, yeah, mummy, I like that. Now, in our training, we always follow a clicker with food because we are wanting to reward the behavior that we've just seen. We don't do clicker just for the sake of it. But you can see how we start getting that lovely like reaction to stuff. The same is true of our marker words, isn't it? Some people say, I'm a good. Some people say nice. Some people say, yeah. One of my clients, if they're here, I can't see you actually, but you will laugh when you see this back. They used to, in the room that I used to teach, I used to hear this, yes, all the time. And I loved that one because it was so unique and so clear. But yes, always equaled this dog going, fantastic. That is classical conditioning. Beautiful example of classical conditioning. Stuff that we see with that we haven't put so much effort into. Now, this is quite wide ranging, and I could talk for a very long time about this, but really obvious ones. The food bowl. That metal bowl or that go slow bowl or that Kong that we all have knocking around, that meant nothing to our dog before we started putting food in it. As soon as we started putting food in it, we've started associating that thing with food. So now you go to your cupboard, don't you? You get your Kong out and your dog's ear. Yes, yes, I like this thing. I do. I love this thing. Whereas previously they had absolutely no response to it because it meant nothing before. Good responses usually come when we get leads out. A lot of us have good responses when we get harness. I pick up a harness, I pick up a lead, and Bob's like, hey, up, we're going on a walk, are we? Happy days. Bob's responses, muted compared to a lot of dogs. They'll get up and meander over. But a lot of dogs that go whizzy, they go, yeah, this is brilliant. Some dogs don't like their harness. They don't like that association. They don't like the feeling of it going on their head. So you could pick up the exact same piece of equipment and get a completely opposite effect. You get a dog now that goes, oh, I know what that is. Thank you very much. I'm going to go away from here. Don't like that experience. Keys are another one. Lauren, our trainer, she says very clearly if she picks up her treat pouch to walk out the door with, Luna knows her dog. She knows that she's going with her. Fantastic. She comes up and she gets up. If Lauren picks up her keys but without her treat pouch, Luna's obviously not coming. She shakes her shoulders and goes to sleep on the sofa. Happy days. Thank you very much. She's totally figured out that that treat pouch means she's going with her or not. Okay. Keys can be a sad thing to be picking up if we've got a dog with separation anxiety. So a dog that we can't leave at home, they start to cue in to our signals that we're going to leave the house. I've put on this set of shoes, I've put on my coat, I've picked up my keys, and I've done it in that order. And they work out very clearly that that means that you're about to do this. It's all associated with that exit strategy. Not very nice. I ran a workshop the other week for dog walkers, and they were complaining. It came up in discussion that their dogs know when they've reached the walk. So they can be driving around on the street and they can be anywhere in the world and they can just be driving around, driving around, driving around. But as soon as they get to a particular point on their destination and they maybe chuck their van in reverse at a certain corner, and they start reversing back to get to the parking space, their dogs go mental in the back of their van. Woof, woof, yes, yes, yes. And they start whizzing around and banging around and howling and what have you. Your dogs might do it when you start turning up at the Chevy and you go to a particular spot and they just perk up and they know they're there. They know they're there. And they've associated that set of turns, all those smells in the air that they're getting through the aircon, they've associated that with where you're going and what you're about to do next. You start seeing these lovely responses, okay? Excuse me. I'm still fighting this cold. Can you believe it? My last example for you is a similar one to this. Maddie, another trainer that we work very closely with, she's fantastic, and she's taught her dog that when her partner comes home, I won't say the words that she uses, but she says essentially, "Who's this?" And that means daddy's about to come in the door. "Who's this?" means daddy's about to come in the door. So when she says, "Who's this?" her dogs get very giddy and very excited. If she now says, "Who's this?" when there's a new person coming near them, she gets that same emotional response, that same like, woo response to things. And she's doing it deliberately now. She's saying, "Who's this?" because she wants to tee this interaction up to be a nice, positive experience for these guys. She wants the dogs to be in a happy, giddy, experienced place. She wants that when they're meeting these people. So she's doing it deliberately now, very cleverly. She's initially associated the words "who's this" with her partner, who they like coming in. And now she's starting to transfer it over to other people. So the results from that show is essentially our dogs are learning 24/7. They're consistently watching, they're consistently associating things with us. Classical conditioning is happening pretty much all of the time. And it's a question of, are you aware of it? Are you okay with it? Do you want to get yourself involved with it? All these sorts of things start coming up. When you start seeing your dog does a thing after this thing happens, we know that there's an association going on there. Do we need to get in there and maybe do something different? Or are we happy for this to play out? And it's quite interesting when we start thinking of it like that. So let's have a little look at stuff that we can teach actively and deliberately, stuff that's useful to us. There's a whole myriad of things that are useful to us. And to be real, most training that we do with our dogs actually sits in operant conditioning. That's next week's discussion. We don't actively tend to do a lot of classical conditioning on purpose because it's done by association. We often find it's the accidental stuff that we've done, the lead, the clicker, the good. We might deliberately do that for a little bit, but we don't tend to keep that up. Ones that are useful for us, the name game, that's always a nice basic place to start, right? Name equals food. So in this situation, we obviously start teaching this when they're puppies, but for sure when they're older, it's definitely worth a refresh sometimes, because we as humans can come to expect that our dog is going to do a certain thing. But actually, when we test it and we look for the empirical data, we find that perhaps they don't. So for example, I took Bob out for a walk today, and if you'd asked me before, I'd have said, yeah, Bob's name reflex is pretty good. And by that, I would mean when I say Bob, I would expect him to turn his head around and look at me. But he didn't today. The evidence said that's not necessarily the truth, Rach. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back to the basics, and I'm going to start layering that back in, and I'm going to actively choose to teach that, because for me, it's very important that as soon as I call my dog's name, they head turn to me and they look at me. So name game does that. Easiest way to teach the name game is to get your daily allowance of food. We do this in puppy class, so please excuse me if you've heard this before, but when you come downstairs on a morning, I expect you to be weighing out your dog's daily allocation of food at that point, if they're on kibble for sure, and they're going to use that throughout the course of their day for their meals. If we stop weighing out food, that's where we get dogs that fluctuate in their weight, because actually we've not maybe kept such a tab on it. And research definitely shows us that we get a bit more generous with our scooping as we go along. So always weigh out your dog's food if it's available to be weighed out. And what I would say is come down, weigh it out in the morning. Now, most of that obviously is going to go in their food, but some of it may well go to training. And I would say make yourself a nice little Tupperware pot. I'm a neat freak. I quite like to know that things go in their place. So for me, if I put that Tupperware box of kibble somewhere weird and random that I'm going to see it during the course of the day, I'm going to get annoyed with it, and I'm going to go, why is that? Ah, I remember why that's there. Real easy. Get your Tupperware of kibble, and you're literally going to go and find your dog, and you're going to say their name. That would be theoretically a neutral stimulus. It certainly is at the start, isn't it? Where it lies on this spectrum of conditioned and unconditioned and neutral as they get older is a little bit more fuzzy. But theoretically, their name, Bob, is a neutral stimulus, and you're going to compare it with your conditioned stimulus that I've lost, which is the food, isn't it? Now, I'm not doing this to make them dribble. I've already said this. We're not going for Pavlov's dogs. But what we do know is if I shove a piece of food in my dog's mouth, or they know food's coming, they're likely to head turn towards me, aren't they? Because they want to get that food in their mouth as quickly as they possibly can do. So I'm going to say, Bob, and then I'm going to shove food in his mouth within 2 seconds. And that's your trick. You need to be getting there within 2 seconds. So your neutral stimulus is followed by your conditioned stimulus, the thing that's going to do the training for you, within 2 seconds. Bob, treat, Bob, treat, Bob, treat, and walk away. We would generally recommend doing it 10 times, so like 10 treats, 10 times a day. That gets you 100 treats in one day. That's a lot of repetition for something, isn't it? Some skills require significantly more repetition than other skills. And, it's just based on your dog and how quickly they learn and how quickly they pick up that thing. Obviously, the better the treat, the quicker the learning is going to be, because they're more stimulated. They're more triggered by that thing that's been given to them. Bit of kibble, you might get a little bit of dopamine lighting up in there. Nice bit of chicken, boom, 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 their brain's going to start lighting up big time. So there's a larger association with it, which is why we tend to find when we train with the good stuff, we get better responses. So name game, really easy. I would say put your thing by the kettle, put your tub of treats by the kettle. So whenever you make yourself a cup of tea, it's there, boom, you can pick it up, go find your dog. To be fair, they will learn very quickly that unclicking of that Tupperware was initially a neutral stimulus, becomes a very quickly conditioned stimulus, because they learn that the clicking of that Tupperware equals food's about to come out and come into play. They'll come flying through for that. And you can play your name game. Bob, treat, Bob, treat, Bob, treat, Bob, treat. Happy days. And you can start getting them back on cue. Another nice one that we do very frequently that a lot of you already know is what we call the 1, 2, 3 game. And credit where it's due, this comes from Leslie McDevitt, a book called Control Unleashed. Really, really good book. So here, what we're teaching our dog is to count. What we're really doing is teaching them to anticipate our end number. So we would teach it by saying 1, 2, 3. And when I say 3, I grab my treat and I give it to the dog. So it goes 1, 2, 3. Treat. 1, 2, 3. Treat. Just like that, in that order. And the reason I'm doing it 1, 2, 3, then treat, is because I need to make sure that my neutral stimulus, the 1, 2, 3, comes before the unconditioned stimulus. It can't come after. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. It doesn't train anything. We need the neutral stimulus first and then the unconditioned stimulus afterwards. So 1, 2, and give them the thing. And you'll know that this is starting to work because what we start seeing is anticipatory behaviors. Anticipatory behaviors look like our dog looking at us, and they might start ear twitching. They might start flicking their little tail. They might start going, whoa, and you get like little shoulder jerks and all sorts. Bob has a little wide eye moment. So when I say 3, he goes like that with his eyes. It's real small, real subtle, but it's this little flicking of thing. I've seen dogs do tappy toes. I've seen them get themselves so giddy they can't sit still. These are all anticipatory behaviors, and these are telling you this dog is learning. This dog is absolutely learning that you're saying these numbers and it knows food is coming. That can be really useful out in the wild if your dog knows that 1, 2, 3 equals they're about to get a treat. They might be slightly distracted by something. I say slightly distracted. We're going to look at levels of distraction in another video that we do. But they could be slightly distracted by something, or they could be maybe paying attention to a dog over there. You could start counting 1, 2, 3, and what you're going to see is your dog go, whoa, wait a minute. And they're going to turn. They're going to engage with you because they know that that food is coming. Bonkers helpful. If you want to get your dog moving away from something that's over there, you start counting. You have to do it in the same tonality, but you're going to get that attention and you're going to be able to guide that dog to come away with you. Really, really helpful. Both of those have been taught with food. We can teach stuff without food very easily. So all you need to do is find what is going to get your dog, what is the unconditioned stimulus as such, right? For me, if I turn, and I suspect most of you, to be fair, if you are in the middle of a walk and you literally about turn on yourself and walk off in the other direction, I can pretty much guarantee you that the unconditioned response to that is that your dog is going to follow you. They are pretty much set up to turn around and follow you, okay? They are aware of where you are. And if you turn an about face and walk away, they're going to come, okay? I can predict that. I can get my dog to respond to me verbally before I turn away. So my neutral stimulus here is the words, this way. That's all I'm saying. This way means absolutely nothing to my dog. It's a neutral stimulus until I do my thing that creates the unconditioned stimulus is me turning around and walking away. And that creates the unconditioned response. They turn and respond to me. They come with me. So I would say, this way. Turn, walk away, dog's going to turn and follow me, right? Because they saw me turning and following. After a while, after repetition, after repetition, that's harder to say than you think, I'm going to be able to shout this way. The dog's going to turn, look, and see where I'm going. Absolutely perfect. Really, really helpful for me to be able to tell the dog that I'm about to change direction. So you better darn well watch me, kid, aren't you? Really, really helpful, particularly if you've got a kid that's somewhere off in front of you and you need to be able to change direction because they're going down the wrong fork of the Y and we need to go this way, kid. Really, really helpful. The last one I'm going to do, which is going to garner a giggle from some of you, because it's not a bugbear of mine, but it is something that I touch on reasonably frequently, is verbal cues. So a lot of us teach, and certainly when you're doing trick training with us, we don't bother adding in a verbal cue to start with because actually the dog hasn't learned what to do yet. So we teach things by using a lure, and then those lures turn into hand signals. For example, my hand signal for sit is this, my hand signal for down is this, my hand signal for wait is this. And if I don't want to, I don't have to put any words on it. Some people know who I'm talking to. And we don't necessarily need to put words on it, and that's fine. But if I do want to put words on it and I don't want to keep using my hand signals, I have to make sure I'm doing it in the right order. So it would go sit. Sit means nothing to the dog. My hand signal does, right? Sit, hand, then they get the treat for doing the thing. If they did the thing, obviously, if they didn't do the thing, then they don't get the treat. But my cue, my verbal signal needs to come before my known hand signal, right? They know this. My cue, my verbal signal is a predictor that I'm about to do my hand signal. So after a while, after pairing the two together, sit, and then my hand signal, they go, do you know what? Every time she says sit, she then follows it up with this. I might as well just put my bum on the floor now. And they cut out this bit for us. And that's how we know that we've really got it. That's how we know we've got that beautiful conditioned stimulus at the end of it. I say sit and they shove their bum on the floor before I've had chance to do this. We see this going wrong quite a lot. Troubleshooting where this isn't working is when people do it together or they do it the wrong way around. So you have to make sure you know which one they know. Sometimes the dog knows the word, but not the hand signal. In that case, I would do my hand signal first, then my known cue second, the verbal signal. So that would look like sit, and then they would get the reward for sitting. So whichever one you're wanting to teach them, that needs to come first. There needs to be a beat between the two so that it's the clarity that this thing is separate to that thing. I follow it up with the one that they know, and then they get the reward for doing the behavior. And that would be classically conditioning a verbal cue instead of a hand signal. So a few good examples of things that we can use. I've highlighted a couple of examples of things that just happen in day-to-day life, and we've looked at the science behind how that happens and why that happens. We've got a couple of minutes left, and I'm going to open up the floor now for some questions and answers. So we can have a little chat about anything that perhaps you've maybe thought of as we're going through, or stuff that you're seeing in your day-to-day life that maybe we can have a bit of a giggle about and then have a bit of a chat through as well. So has anybody got any questions? Silence. I love this part. No. Okay. I might even just start knocking off these questions and answers because I look like a right muppet. Either that or I'm going to make people come with some questions prepared. That might be the sensible answer right then. Okay. So that is us today with classical conditioning. It happens all the time, consistently all the time. We rarely use it ourselves actively. It's mostly happening throughout the course of the day as our dogs are really nicely associating stuff with things that are happening as consequences afterwards. Next week, we are looking at operant conditioning, and that is going to involve the 4 quadrants. If you've ever heard of 4 quadrants in dog training, that is what we're going to be looking at next week. I'm not going to lie, it can be a bit of a head masher. So you're going to need pen and paper potentially for that one, and a good drink to see you through that session. And there we go. We'll have a little look at other ways of learning next week. Perfect. Right. Thank you very much for joining me, T, and I shall speak to you next week. Goodbye.